Good morning and welcome to Evre. Julia Mossbridge is with us today, so what a Christmas present that is. Julia has a presentation behind us that she's going to be clicking through while she talks to us. And I'd ask that, I know you need to probably do your alt click to zoom in on her presentation, but try not to do a regular click because that will take her off the slide that she's using. At one point we had that fixed, but it's not working this morning. So if you can try not to click on the presentation, that would be wonderful. Otherwise, Julie will chase you down and take her slide back to what it was. But it would be gratefully helpful if you could try to avoid doing a regular click on it. So to get started, some of you have already seen Evre, and I've built this sim to help bring forth the new science that's happening in the things that we call the paranormal, or things that we don't understand. And I first got interested in this subject by having precognitive dreams all my life. And I heard Julia mention in a conference that I watched on YouTube that she had similar experience with that type of thing and became interested in this topic as well for that reason. So I liked Julia right away. And I loved how she was speaking in certain conferences where she would explain things in a layman's term way that I could really understand what she was explaining about really fancy technical science that was behind some of these things that we're exploring. So I thought it was worth a build to try and build an environment where we could travel through time and experience different periods in time, and then an environment where there would be all time or no time, because I'm really, really wondering that whether or not time really exists, or if it exists in a way that we don't understand it yet. And we've had it wrong all this time, no pun intended. So real quick, when we were first setting up the guests to come speak on Evre, I had been watching a movie that I just got hooked on the side called The Devil's Whore. And it's about a battle in England and the history of the Civil War in England and the life and times of a lady who lived back then. And don't ask me to explain the title. You have to see the movie to understand it. But in that movie was featured a battle, the Battle of Edge Hill, which was the first battle in the Civil War. And it's a powerful battle in the film. And I've watched the film several times over and over and kind of became really obsessed and interested in that period of time for both personal reasons and the fact that it was just a really good movie. And then when Maggie came along and told me what she was going to discuss in her first presentation here on Evre, Dr. Maggie Larimore, who's sitting here in the audience, and she mentioned the Battle of Edge Hill as a time slip she was going to discuss in her presentation. So I would write that one off as a funny coincidence, because I had been obsessed for a couple of weeks with the very battle that Maggie was going to discuss here at Evre in the future, and I didn't know about it yet. So that turned out to be really cool. But that's not something that would stop me in my tracks and go, whoa, that blows my mind. When I dreamed that a 747 would break in half in Denmark in 3 days, and that really happens, that will stop me in my tracks. So there's something going on with our ability to sense different times without having any control over it. And it's sort of beyond a coincidence. So I'll let Julia explain that to you and explain her research and what she's digging into on this subject, because I think it's fascinating. And I hang on to every word she says, and I think you guys will too. So again, welcome to Evre, and I will hand over the mic to Julia, and we can get started. Thanks for coming.
Thanks, everyone. I'm very new to Second Life, and if I look really robotic, or if you notice me acting strange on the podium, just know that I have absolutely no control over what I'm doing. And that's sort of the theme of the talk anyway, so that works out. But Tahiti, I just have to ask you, did you actually have that dream?
Yes, I did.
And when was it?
I told my family about it ahead of time. It was several years ago.
Did that happen?
I don't remember.
I didn't know it was 747. Oh.
It was on takeoff in either Belgium or Denmark. I forget which. But a 747 broke in half on takeoff. There were injuries, but no one was killed. It was
Can I
part
ask
of
you,
like,
did it, when you say it stopped you in your tracks, but it didn't, it kept you moving. It's the opposite, right?
well, I kind of tell my family when I have a dream like that before it happens so people believe me,
Yeah.
but I didn't have enough information to make calls and stop it. You know, I've never done
Yep,
that
sure.
before, but
Right.
what's funny is I told everybody, this one's funny, this one's not going to happen. It's not possible for a 747 to break in half.
Yeah.
And then
Yeah, I'll tell you. I mean, my experience with those dreams that I've had since I was a kid is no one, there's no use right now. There's no way to use them usefully, and it's really sad, and it ends up making me feel very helpless. And so one of my goals is to help create a repository where people who have dreams and insights and intuitions like that can register them online, and then we can pool them. So if multiple people are having dreams like that, you know, maybe we start to take it more seriously. Or if someone who has a history, the documented history online of being predictive, has a dream like that, we take it more seriously. Anyway, it just feels very helpless to me to have that experience. So I'm sympathetic. Anyway, hello everyone. On that note, thanks for being here, and I want to talk about prediction and productivity, better living through non-conscious processing, and you'll see what I mean soon. Hello, Bruce. But essentially I'm talking about what I believe to be sort of the black sheep of the neuroscience psychology family, which is non-conscious processing. So there's a lot of excitement and interest in conscious awareness and consciousness, lots of conferences, lots of articles in the New York Times and the New Yorker about what consciousness is. But what about all this processing that goes on non-consciously that basically dominates? And the relationship between that and temporal perception, time, how we perceive time. So here we go. So I'm going to make some simple statements here that I think are logical. We'll see. But it is clear to me that in my individual conscious awareness, events generally occur linearly in time. I'm not talking about when I'm having a dream about the future. I'm just talking about when I'm picking up my teacup, drinking from it, and putting it back down. And then, you know, my son comes into the room. And I could tell you a story about I picked up the teacup, I drank from it, I put it back down, and my son came in the room. And that's how it seemed to have occurred. There seemed to be event A, B, and C. And C did not come before A. And C, my son coming into the room, seems to have not had any effect on A, because generally things that we say come first don't have effects, or can have effects on things that come second, but things that come seconds we say cannot have effects on things that come first. So that's sort of the story that we have about how things work in our individual conscious awareness. And so my sort of lifetime question is, okay, that is pretty much my experience, and so is this true for processes that we're not generally conscious of, non-conscious processes? So let me see. Wait, before we go to that, let me explain what I mean by non-conscious processes. I'm not having, oh, there we go, good. What I mean by non-conscious processes is if you take a set of all the things, yeah, I don't have great control over the slides, so we'll just try to muddle through this. If you take a set of all the things, let's say you're just doing set theory mathematically, or you're just a person who likes to divide things into groups. So if you take a set of all the things of which you're consciously aware, so these are all experiences, that's what I'm calling your individual conscious awareness. So everything that happens during your day, and even things that you remember happening in dreams, so the memory as you wake up is a conscious experience, even if what occurred in the dream you weren't conscious of at the time. And then you take that set of things, you put it in one pile. Everything else I'm calling a non-conscious process, by which I mean anything that's not your waking everyday experience. So in other words, that pile of non-conscious processes is way bigger than the pile of conscious processes. So conscious processes are, this is my experience today, this is what's happening, right? Non-conscious processes include all the interactions in your brain that influence what your conscious experience is. It also includes this chunk of stuff that Freud and Jung called the unconscious mind. It also includes, the table and what it's like to be a molecule in the table, if it's like anything to be a molecule in the table. So in other words, there's a giant universe of non-conscious processes which are just defined by what you specifically aren't conscious of. Okay, now, so my sort of lifetime question is, what is the case for time for non-conscious processes? Because the deal is, we know about what the case is for conscious processes because we have this story about what happens. For most of us have this linear experience of time. But we don't know what the deal is with non-conscious processes, and that's what I'm really interested in. So, because it seems to me that's closer to, I'll get to this later, but it seems to me that's closer to reality. So there's several ways to look at this. And one way is a way that Daryl Bem invented, which is to reverse something called a priming experiment. So I'm going to go through that briefly here. So a regular forward priming experiment goes like this. You might have a word like dangerous, that's evocative, and then you might have a picture like a cute kid eating an ice cream cone, and then the participant is asked to respond. Was that a positive or negative picture? Okay, so if you're asked to respond as quickly as possible, this task can get a little confusing because you saw this weird word that doesn't match the picture. And it turns out it takes longer to respond. So if this y-axis is slower response versus faster response at the bottom, when the word, like on this red column on the right, when the word is dangerous, and the picture is this cute girl eating the ice cream cone, when the word doesn't match the picture, that's called incongruent. And the responses are much longer than when the word does match the picture. Here the word is delightful, that matches the picture, whereas dangerous does not. And this is a standard psychological result, and it's one of those psychological results that's actually incredibly replicable, which is exciting. And someone is asking, is this like an implicit association test? No, that's a whole different setup. Implicit association test, how about if I don't go into that right now? This is, it's like it in the sense, okay, yeah, I guess there are some similarities. It's like it in the sense that your response time is the dependent variable that's interesting to the researchers. So how speedily you respond is telling them something about how you're cognitively matching these things. So that's like it. It's different in that we're not really asking the participant, what is your experience of, for instance, elderly people versus younger people? Do you think elderly people are actually, not as smart or whatever it is that we're checking for your bias? In this case, it's how are you processing the difference between this word and this picture? And there are some people with some disorders who don't actually get it that this kid is not dangerous. But it's more like just showing that there's this cognitive disconnect when things don't match. In a way, an implicit association test is like taking this thing and making the cognitive mismatch be a fill-in from your own mind rather than out there. So that's kind of one way to think of it. But yeah, I guess there are some similarities, so thanks for asking that. Anyway, having said that, this is the forward priming method. And so Daryl Bem at Cornell University made this nice experiment where he said, let's reverse that. So that was a forward method. So again, I'm just reminding you of my question. How do we ask this question using this method? Well, we turn it around in time, which was his insight. We do something called retroactive or reverse priming. Because now we're going to tap into information in the future, I'll show you how, that we don't normally feel like we should get through our conscious awareness. So one of the methods that I'm saying here is to do this retroactive priming experiment. In this kind of experiment, what you do is you show a picture of an image. Again, you're always going to have, have positive pictures, you'll have negative pictures, but in this case I'm using the girl with the ice cream cone again. Or the kid, I don't know if this is a boy or girl. But you have a picture And then the person is asked to classify very quickly, was this a positive or negative picture? So it's the same question as before in the forward priming experiment, except you ask it at a different time. Instead of waiting until the word and the picture have been shown, you just wait until after the picture has been shown. So after the person responds, then you show the word. And so the question is, are there non-conscious processes which, when you're responding quickly, we generally think that non-conscious processes are in charge of your response, or are largely in charge. Are the non-conscious processes reaching into the future to get information about the future word? And indeed, it looks the case. So here are the data. So when the word after the response did not match the picture, so that's on the right, you have a significantly slower response than when the word did match the picture, which is on the left. Now, these data are my reanalysis of data that was a replication of this experiment. So in other words, there was an original experiment published in 2011. It was then replicated by Daryl Bem, Marilyn Schlitz, and Arnaud Delorme, and then I took the data from a bunch of the English speaker subset of that, and showed the replication here. And then this has been replicated something like, I think, 15 more times. So this, and that doesn't, when I say replicated 15 more times, that doesn't mean it was significant 15 more times, but it was tending in that direction, and other times it was significant. So overall, in a meta-analysis, it looks like this effect replicates, and that's a meta-analysis that I'll talk about in a second. So, anyway, so interesting, right? So it looks like the same or similar kind of process. I can't say that. What I can say is it looks like the same effect that's happening in the forward direction happens in this reverse direction when the information is coming in the future that doesn't match the information that you just got in the past. So it looks like to the non-conscious processes, at least some of them, you can get information from the near future. So that's interesting. By the way, I've been working with this guy in Germany, Mark Whitman, who's a mainstream time researcher who started getting interested in this stuff, and he's a really great researcher on time perception. And we just did a study where we looked at that same task and found that stress levels correlated with a decrease in the different. Wait, let me go back to the last slide so this is going to make sense. This difference between the red and the blue is sort of the effect, the size of the effect. And each person, you can take their red, which is mismatched word and picture, and blue, which is matched word and picture, subtract them. And the size of that difference is anti-correlated with stress. So there's not much of a difference between these two if someone's really stressed out. If someone's mellow, there's more of a difference between these two, suggesting that when you're more relaxed, your non-conscious processes are able to pick up on future events better. So that's really interesting. Hot off the presses. I don't even have a slide. Okay, so this is from the Daryl Bem, Patrizio Tresoldi, Michael Dugan, Thomas Reberan meta-analysis that came out in 2015 and then got corrected and came out again in 2016, January 2016. And it's a slide that you would really have to zoom in on. I think you can, actually, which is nice here. Usually when I'm giving talks to people in a real amphitheater, I just complain at myself for presenting the slide yet again. But the reason I do it is so that people can ask me about it later, basically. But what it is these are a bunch of different studies that all had to do with psychological or behavioral ways of assessing information for future events. And I have this box around the retroactive priming to remind myself to say that this has been replicated multiple times, which I already said, so that's good. But also, so I guess I don't have another slide that says this, so I'm going to go back here to my box. But also the thing to notice is that in general, tasks at the top here that are called fast thinking tasks, fast thinking protocols, are tasks where people had to respond quickly. So, for instance, just like that retroactive priming task, you had to respond quickly to this. Was this a positive or negative image, right? So the take-home message there is that those experiments on average tend to replicate. On the bottom, we've got slow thinking protocols, so where people had to deliberate for a while. Well, what do you think this is? Well, what do you think that is? And, you know, maybe the form of response wasn't a button press, maybe it was typing in a word. and they had to think about the word. Those did not replicate. And in fact, as I'll tell you in a minute, there's a way to kind of turn one of these slow thinking protocols into fast thinking protocols and then find the effect again. And when I say the effect again, I'm talking about this getting information from the future through non-conscious means. So in all of these experiments, it's never the case that, or I should just be more positive, in every one of these experiments, it's the case that, and these are 90 different experiments, in every one of these experiments, it's the case, good Lord, I don't know what's happening with the slides, so I'm just going to have to try to get back to that table. In every one of these experiments, the case is that people are not being asked, hey, tell me about the future, right? Because that would be a question for your conscious mind. Oh, tell me what's going to happen next. And most people's answers would be, yeah, I have no idea. Or, okay, yeah, I have an idea, but then they'd be wrong, or they would just operate at chance. So not statistically impressively for most people. These questions are more like, hey, I want you to do this task, and later I will analyze your data and see if you were getting information from the future, just like that task I just explained. Okay, so again, I like to come back to the basic question because I guess I was taught that you hammer things home. So yeah, so my basic question is, again, that there's this separation between our conscious awareness and everything else, and we don't really understand what's going on with everything else. So how else can we ask this question? So here's another method, which is to look at the physiology, people's physiology prior to random events. So it's another way to access information about what's going on outside of conscious awareness, which it doesn't mean that all physiology is non-conscious, but for, excuse me, for most people who aren't yogis, they don't have control over their physiology. So their physiology can tell a different story than the rest. So this kind of experiment goes like this. This is an experiment I did when I was a postdoc at Northwestern, so a while back. But I still have an appointment there, but I'm not physically there most of the time. But in this kind of protocol, I show participants 4 pictures, and they're neither positive nor negative, like mushrooms, a woman relaxing, a man playing a violin, and a garbage can. So they're just pictures. And their job is to select which of these 4 pictures will be the one that's going to show up. And these are Northwestern undergrads. And, you know, I tell them this, and they're like, oh, you want me to predict the future? And I'm like, yeah, it's crazy, right? And they're like, yeah. So everyone agrees it's like a crazy thing to do. At the same time, they will do it, and they'll get into it. And I then, at the same time, am recording physiological measures from them. And at the time, I was recording skin conductance and heart rate when I was doing this experiment, sort of continuously. That later, then I would just chop up into sections according to whether they won or did not win. And by win, I mean whether they were correctly figured out which one was the image that would win. So anyone here who's seen this talk before, I haven't changed my slides, so you know that this is the one that wins, and it's not precognition, it's just memory. But that's what it would be like for the participants. They could take as long as they wanted to figure out which one would win. They would click on the one that they thought would win, and then one of them would randomly be selected by the computer and would be popping up. Okay, so that's that. Now, just so you know, they operated at chance, so on average, you know, no one was very good at this task, and on average, they looked just like they were 25% correct, just as you would expect. Physiologically, there's a different story. And so what I did, by the way, is I took the very first trial, because I got very concerned about something called expectation bias, which is a phenomenon in which you can, people expect certain events to occur based on a false assumption about how previous events are connected to future events. So human beings are not good at thinking that things are random. So we tend to create meaning in just about everything, and we tend to try to predict. We're like prediction machines. We try to predict just about everything based on the past, even when we're told, look, a random number generator is in charge of this, okay? And so, And so the reason I'm going on about this is to explain why I picked the very first trial. I did 25 trials, and I just threw away, for the most part, I threw away 24. I did look at the data with those, and there was an interesting effect where people looked like they were predicting the future, but I got nervous that that was being controlled by people's psychological desire to predict the future, which then controlled the physiology. So I dumped that, and I said I'm just going to look at the first trial because there was no past experience. So I don't have to think that this physiological difference that I saw, which was significant, was influenced by the past, and therefore not about predicting the future, if you see what I mean. So I just wanted to be super sure. So anyway, what I'm showing you here is a bunch of women. I think it says 54, and then on the bottom 30 men. And these are women and men barely. I mean, they're like freshmen, so they're like 18 years old, 18 or 19. On the top, we're looking at change in skin conductance and microsiemens. So this is change from baseline. It's anchored to a baseline. And the reason I'm not showing the left-hand side is I want to talk about the right-hand side first. The right-hand side is what happens after they see at that line, that vertical line, is the moment that they see the whether they're correct or not. So they see the, quote, winning image at that time. The black, the line in the middle of the black is the average of the skin conductance change for the winning, or when they get it correct, and the red is incorrect. And you can see this clear separation on the bottom for the men. So there's a clear separation there. So the width of those bars that's all the standard error at each point for each person. Across people. And their standard error is much smaller for incorrect for men. For women, you have this messy situation where you basically don't see a difference in response physiologically after the event. And I just want to point out that the y-axes for men is twice that of women. In other words, men have this large separation here, and they're way more excited about getting that first one correct. These are 18-year-old guys. They seem to want to be right. And get excited about winning. And I think this result itself is fascinating because it's fascinating to me because men are twice as likely to be gambling addicts. And if the very first time they do this, they're this excited, I kind of understand why, just physiologically. But okay, so having said that, now what does it look like on the other side of that line, which is the 10 seconds prior? So what I've just shown you is 10 seconds after they find out who wins, or whether they've won. So let's look behind the curtain. Okay, so on the top we have women getting more excited when they're about to be incorrect and less excited. Skin conductance is a measure of arousal. So when I say excited, I'm just loosely saying higher skin conductance change in skin conductance equals more arousal. So women, looking like they're getting more excited when they're about to be incorrect, less excited when they're about to be correct. Although this difference it's borderline significant, but it's not significant. Mostly the effect is going on down here with men. When they're about to get it correct, they're ramping up bigly, versus incorrect, they're not. They're sort of staying the same. And this difference is significant, and then this gender interaction, which means the difference between women versus the difference between men, is significant. In other words, men and women look like they're going in different directions. They're doing different things. Now, one of the reasons I was very impressed by this result, and I show it a lot, is because anytime you have an effect that's very controversial, like, oh, guess what, 10 seconds prior to an event, I can tell you whether you're going to win or lose based on your skin conductance. It's really nice to show that it's not some kind of artifact or problem with your analysis that shows up in every case. And so when you have a gender difference like this, clearly, I'm analyzing the data the same way. The only difference is I'm making two different plots, one for men, one for women, and the plots are made the same way. So it's clear that there's something, either there's some kind of artifact that is happens to be separated by gender, or there's really something going on. So then I went after the question, okay, is there some kind of artifact that's separated by gender? I tried to look at the heart rate data, but on this single trial with this few number of people, the heart rate data were all over the place and I got nothing. So actually, I went after that next. Let's see if I'm going to tell you about it. Oh, good, I am. Okay. Oh, someone has to leave because they need to get voice back. Does that mean they can't hear me? Oh, is anyone else having trouble hearing me? Okay, so it's just that one person. Okay, well, I'm sorry, person. Oh, I see. So that person probably just has to restart their browser or whatever it is. Okay, yeah, understood. Okay, so I'll just keep going. Okay, so yeah, so the thing is I wanted to get heart activity. Oh, okay, good. Thanks, Bruce. I wanted to get heart activity because in the original I had the heart activity, but I didn't have enough participants, so I thought I'm going to make a smartphone app so that I could get heart activity from way many more participants. It takes a long time to get a bunch of people in the lab to do physiology experiments, and especially when you're only doing one trial. Because, I mean, in that original experiment, I just took the first trial, but then I thought, well, really, all I need is the first trial. So I'm going to make a smartphone app that just does one trial, which only takes, a minute, really. And we're going to see how that goes. So I made this commercial app called Choice Compass, which is, oh, hello? Oh, someone came in with voice. Okay. I made a commercial app called Choice Compass, which is about, it's a different thing. It's about helping people learn to make more effective decisions based on mathematics of heartbeats and the relationship between the mathematics of heart rhythms and positive and negative mood as you think about something. So that's one thing. But I took the back end of that, which was just the algorithm that detected the heartbeat, really in a very detailed way, just by putting people's fingers over their webcam on their phone. And I decided to use that to make something called a heart tracker research app, which I just used myself, which is, oh, whoops, we went too far. I'll talk about those results in a minute, but let me talk about the app briefly so you understand the task. Oh, is someone changing the slides? I don't have the experience that I'm doing it, but it's possible someone else is doing it because they're trying to zoom in. Yeah. Oh, it's okay. I'll tell you what's on there. What's on there on the right-hand side is it says, yeah, everyone don't click on the slides, please. We haven't been able to lock them. What's on the right-hand side is what the Heart Tracker app does, which is it says to the person, okay, click on which of these 4 doors you think will give you a bonus. So I'm actually going to give them a $2 bonus if they get the right door. Now, what I tell them in the consent form is you have a 50% chance of winning the $2. But everyone thinks, of course, when you see 4 doors, it's a 25% chance. And I do that on purpose because then it's more exciting when they win, but they still have a 50% chance of winning. So I want to create excitement because there's this belief I have that seems reasonable based on what we know so far about this kind of stuff that Dean Radin has done and Dick Bierman has done, that the emotionality of the event is important. So the more emotional, it's almost like you might be predicting your future physiology. And actually, if we go back to this with the men and women, it looks a little like that, right? So in the past here, prior to finding out, women are kind of muddy. And in the future, they're kind of muddy. Men are very clear. You see this very clear separation, and there's this mirror image here in the future. So maybe you're predicting your own future physiology, right? That could be the case. And so if you make a clear separation, a clear excitement versus sort of a bummed out feeling if you don't win the bonus, then I guess I was thinking that might make a difference. So anyway, people would put their finger on the webcam. I'm getting their heartbeats the whole time. They're choosing one of these 4 doors. After that, there's like a 25-second countdown. Then it is revealed whether they win the bonus or not. And then I tell them, please, please, please don't take your finger off the webcam. Otherwise, I won't pay you your bonus. So they leave their finger on the webcam for another 10 seconds. And then, because I want to see what happens afterwards, and then I give them their bonus or not, depending on whether they won. So that's how that works. So here are the data. So it's just a one-trial thing. They can't download it twice. They can't use it twice. Unless they really work hard to game the system, but very few people are willing to do that because they won't get paid again. That's the thing. And again, we have the same deal. This is now, before it was in skin conductance, now we're in heart rhythms. Now this is many more men and women, and I think that's why you see it more. I actually, myself, having problems zooming in, so I don't remember how many men or women, but I think we're around, 175 or something on both sides. Anyway, hopefully someone who can see that can tell me how many. Something like that, 175 men and 175 women. Is that right? Or 75? 145 women, 147 men. Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, mouse roller can zoom you. Good. All right. So this experiment was actually registered with the Kessler Parapsychology Registry. So I said I was going to do 150 men, 150 women, and then kick out outliers who, those are people whose heart rate physiology was just crazily beyond the average. And so I kicked those out, which means looks like 5 women and 3 men were kicked out for that reason. Yeah, that's right. Kessler Parapsychology Unit. People can pre-register their experiments, and what pre-registration does is it allows you to kind of not fool yourself as an experimentalist into thinking that, oh, I can do this kind of analysis or this kind of analysis, and then I'm just going to present the one that worked, which is something, by the way, everyone's taught to do in graduate school. It doesn't matter what kind of field you're in. Physicists do it, and everyone seems to do it. It's kind of unbelievable. Yeah, and so Carolyn Watt and Jim Kennedy jointly analyze the proposals and make sure all the information is written down. So this was actually pre-registered, so my analysis was pre-registered. So I did the pre-registered analysis, and this is what I found. So on the left we have women, on the right we have men, and the black line is the heartbeats of physiology for those who won, and the red is for the individuals who didn't. And remember, this is one trial, so we're comparing individuals who won versus individuals who didn't. The y-axis is the interpeak interval. So the interpeak interval is essentially the time between heartbeats. So up, high interpeak interval means low heartbeat. So it's like the inverse. Yeah. Oh, was there a question that I missed? Difference in skin chemistry. Oh yeah, so the skin conductance thing, yeah, maybe, but I don't think so. I think it's a psychological difference. I don't think that. I think that is run by psychology. In fact, that's why I wanted to do this experiment with heartbeats to see. And so we see the same thing here. Women are getting sort of faster heartbeats. You see that red line is going down, so that's actually faster heartbeats, higher arousal prior to losing. On the right hand, we have the average is higher arousal, which is the black line for men prior to winning. And this is hard to look at because of the, frankly, the variability. So I average, and I did my analysis over the average as I said I would. And this is what I did the analysis on, which is the average over that 10-second period prior to finding out if they're winning or losing, the bonus. So low arousal again is up, high arousal again is down. These are the mean values. For women, prior to the event, we have the black is about to win, the red is about to lose. So we have lower arousal when about to win, higher when about to lose. That's not a significant difference again. For men, we have a significant difference, but in the opposite direction, just like we did before. The gender difference, the gender interaction is significant, just like before. Kind of remarkable. And then after, you actually don't even have a significant effect for the men, although it's bigger than for the women. And I think that's because I didn't go far enough out in time. So when I redo this experiment, I'm going to take 20 seconds rather than 10 seconds afterwards, because I think it takes a while for the heartbeats to change. I don't know, so we'll see. I'm also doing a $4 version of this experiment. And in fact, I did a $4 version of this experiment, and all hell broke loose in terms of the data, and I didn't know how to interpret it. And then I realized that I think more older people were doing the experiment. But that was and I had noticed in another experiment that women past the age of menopause start to look like men, so they flip over to this other direction. So I know, right? And so anyway, I'm going to redo that experiment, the $4 one, and but that was a post hoc analysis. Yeah, exactly. And so I'm going to redo that experiment in a registered experiment and see if the age effect is real or if I'm making that up. I don't know. But it does. Estrogen causes future seeing. Actually, it would be the opposite. It would be because women are looking more like, let's go back to this result. Men are the ones who are actually more they're significantly seeing the future in this particular experiment, and I do think it's an experiment by experiment thing. And in this experiment, which is about winning and losing, there's more of an after response for men in both of those cases, and I think the pre-response is mirroring that. So I think it's actually more like estrogen might be blocking this particular, well, actually you don't know, right? Could be progesterone, could be estriol, could be some interplay between the HPA axis. Yeah, so here's the thing. We have this story in our culture, right, that women are intuitive, right? And here we have an example now twice that the ones who are getting the information are men. And I think it has exactly, yeah, I think it has exactly to do with what kind of task we're talking about. This is a task about winning. Look how excited they are about winning. They're way more into it. And yeah, second sight is interesting. So winning and an emotional event may be different, and the emotional event might depend on the kind of event, right? If it's an erotic image or something, you know, I think I remember Bierman and Schulte's result, where an erotic image, a different, the emotional sort of a presentiment effect prior to seeing an erotic image was only significant in men, whereas a violent image was significant. Presentiment prior to a violent image was significant in men and women. So we don't know the story. Basically, the deal is there's not enough people doing these experiments rigorously in the field to know the answer to these questions. But these are all really good questions. And I don't buy that men are, you know, more intuitive. I think I don't buy that men or women are more intuitive. I think these simple explanations are not correct. I think it's all about essentially a mirror in time. So if the effect is bigger for men or women afterwards, then I would expect it to be the case in the past as well. And that effect all depends on what the task is. So for instance, second sight, you know, I'm largely Scottish, and I have plenty of precognitive dreams, right? And precognitive waking experiences. And I'm a woman. And I'm though I am menopausal now, I had those experiences well before menopause, like when I was 7 and all through adolescence. So, yeah. Anyway, oh, and this is something from an old meta-analysis, 2012, that I did, showing we had I did it with Patrizio Tresoldi and Jessica Utz, UC Irvine and University of Padova. And I just wanted to show that this isn't. I'm not the only person who did this. In fact, I'm for sure late to the party. But when we analyzed statistically 26 studies that fit our quality criteria, and we split them up into what are we splitting them up into here? Geez, the problem is I have a Mac, and so I don't really get how to zoom in on a Mac. Anyone know how to zoom in on a Mac? Because I have several different slides that split things up, and I want to know that Does anyone know how to zoom in on the slides with a Mac? Like, what is it, option? Camera control? Press Alt. So there's no Alt on a Mac? Do you mean option? Yeah. So yeah, option. Yeah, so when I do option and I click, it just rotates it. So I'm just going to, the little Did I mute my voice? Oh, good Lord. Anyway, can you hear me now? Yes? Okay. Yeah, I shouldn't try to see this. I shouldn't. Holy crap, now I'm like looking at weird, bizarre classifieds. Help me get back to that room. All right. Yeah, so I clicked on the little magnifying glass on the left-hand bar, and now I'm seeing things I don't want to see. Click on the X on the camera controls to reset the camera. Yeah, it would help if I knew where the camera controls were. Yeah, I'm going to click on something and it might make me go away, and I apologize. I'll be back. I just want to get out of where I am. Oh, good. I got it. Okay, good. Oh, lordy, lordy. Anyway, the point of this slide is that across these 26 experiments, basically no matter how you split them up, they show that this effect is significant, and other people are getting it. Now, when I say this effect, I'm not talking about this gender difference in particular, although other researchers have found similar gender differences. I'm talking about the overall effect of people physiologically having traces of future events in present time or a time prior to the event that seems to have caused it. And it's just weird talking about time. You'll notice that it's awkward because the cause generally goes forward in time in our conscious awareness, so I don't know what to say. Yes. How did you know what would come next? Well done. Okay. So basically, this is to the philosophical part of the talk. It seems to me that what we're seeing here is that if you think of a droplet of water in a placid pool, and the reason I use a placid pool is just because it looks like people are better at this kind of stuff, or their data shows this better or their data show this better when they're more relaxed. So that's like a placid pool. We think of a droplet in water, that conscious direction of events in time would be like only looking at half of that water in one direction. Half of that effect of that droplet. But non-conscious processing seems to go at least in the other direction, but actually probably also again in the forward direction. So probably in both, because we also know that we're able to predict using non-conscious tools events that happen in the future. Hey, thanks for the tutorial. That's really helpful. So that's the way I kind of think of it. So our conscious awareness is sort of blocking out half the picture, and maybe that's very useful. Maybe there's a reason why that's useful, right? Frankly, I think it would be confusing if we're walking around all the time with these multiple directions consciously. So it's kind of like we outsource to our conscious awareness just one direction, and in the back end, we're dealing with everything else. So then I sort of started to ask the question, well, what else does our conscious awareness represent differently from non-conscious processes? So let's talk about that. As I was saying earlier, I think there's this fundamental duality. I think there's this fundamental duality between, in fact, I think it's the most fundamental duality we have, which is what it is like to be myself, what it is like to be me, my experience, and I'm not aware of what it's like to be anything else. So no one else is aware of what it's like to be me, and I'm not aware of what it's like to be them. All I have is what it's like to be me. That's me, by the way. That's what I look like, kind of. Yeah, exactly. Bruce. Is it Bruce Nagel? Is it Bruce Nagel? Anyway. There's not me. The dog is not me. The sidewalk is not me. The fish is not me. My husband, not me. My hand is not what it's like to be me. My brain is not what it's like to be me. Just me. And that duality, it pretty much drives everything we do. And because it's the simplest one. So everything can be classified into me and not me. And so what I'm consciously aware of is, so there's another way to think of it. If this line up here is sort of, the y-axis is like our conscious awareness. What I'm consciously aware of feeling is basically high around me and low around everything else. And so my conscious awareness is that. My non-conscious processes is everything else. This is what I was talking about earlier, right? Just to reinforce it visually. And so here's the thing. The materialist neuroscience assumption, which could be right, is my brain, body, and environment control my individual conscious awareness. So in other words, the foods I eat, so if I eat, let's say I drink caffeine in the morning, that goes into my bloodstream, of which I'm not conscious. So that is not, what it is like to be me is not what it's like to be in my bloodstream, right? It's what it's like to have my experiences. So it goes into my bloodstream, of which I'm not conscious. It affects my capillaries around my brain, of which I'm not conscious. It affects my neuronal firing, of which I'm not conscious. I'm only conscious of the outcome of all that. So my brain, my body, and my environment control my individual conscious awareness. That's the essential materialist neuroscience assumption. But there's something different that comes from sort of a post-materialist assumption that let's pretend, or let's not pretend, but let's imagine that the brain doesn't create conscious awareness or isn't the only thing that creates conscious awareness. And that is there's this universal or higher consciousness or something that sort of lives through us that controls our individual conscious awareness, and that includes everything around us. So that feeds into the brain and the fish and the dog and my husband and everything. And that is controlling my individual conscious awareness. In other words, there's this fight about what's controlling our individual conscious awareness. Can we call it universal or higher consciousness, or would you call it our brains and everything else and our bodies? But in a sense, the fight, yes, and I like to call it soup, exactly. But it's something that there's really, in a way, no fight when you look at this fundamental duality, because it's all saying the same thing, is that this thing, the thing that I call me, is not the thing that is controlling me. So, in a sense, everyone agrees, without kind of spelling it out, that we are puppets, when the sort of the mini-me, the thing that I call my individual conscious awareness, is like a puppet that is being controlled by something, the soup or whatever we want to call it, the non-conscious, which creates our individual conscious awareness. So it's like this hand puppet, and with ourselves being controlled by it. And it doesn't matter whether you think this hand puppet is your brain and your body, or whether you think this hand puppet is God, or whatever it is. But no one seems to have the opinion that this conscious awareness controls itself. And yet there's this huge argument that everyone's trying to save free will, which is fascinating. Anyway, we can talk about that. So, if the ability to plan, adapt, and respond intelligently to stimuli implies awareness, then it looks like that for whatever side of this fight you're on, that these non-conscious processes are more aware than sort of who we call us. Tahiti wonders if the non-conscious is the global conscious. Yeah, it could be. It doesn't matter. So that's what I'm saying is there's this mystical argument that says, oh, this non-conscious is the global consciousness. And so when I first gave this talk, Deepak Chopra said, well, that's what we call the global consciousness. I'm like, that's fine. And then there's another group of people says, well, that non-conscious stuff is all your brain and your body. Well, that's fine. But you're not really dealing with that's interesting and everything. But dealing with the implication of either of those is a little bit, to me, more interesting, because you have to deal with the fact that the thing that you identify, most people identify with themselves, is essentially a puppet in either case. So that's interesting. Okay, having said that. What else does our conscious awareness represent differently from non-conscious processes? We've talked about time. Okay? So this is, again, like, here I am, here's my conscious awareness of my experience. But maybe it's not only time, right? Maybe I can represent different versions of myself non-consciously. Maybe represent different things that aren't present in the space that I am in currently, non-consciously. So maybe there's a plethora of things that are represented by non-conscious awareness or non-conscious processes. And so if that is true, you kind of, because this is how we're built to want that information. We want to bridge the gap. We have this desire to bridge that gap and get access to that information. It's kind of like we do using these paradigms that allow you to tap into physiology or into psychology using behavioral responses that are made too quickly to control consciously. So that's the question I want to leave with you and maybe discuss in a question-answer format. And I just want to thank collaborators Chris Fields and Iman Sparus, everyone on the IONS research team. And I'm going to type in here the name of my new book in case you have $70 and want to buy it. It's expensive because it's a textbook. It's the here. It's called Transcendent Mind: Rethinking the Science of Consciousness, and it's published by the American Psychological Association Books division. And thanks. Yeah, we worked really hard on this book, and it tries to take an even handed approach, an incredibly rigorous. We worked very hard to make it a rigorous approach, but yet we still brought up things that will make most people balk, because everyone has their own boggle threshold with this stuff. And that's about it. You're welcome to contact me if you have a funding idea or if you have an experimental idea. I am, oh yeah, Amatsurai. We talked about our book and the creation of our book and why we did our book, and we sort of summarized our book. And so there's a video of that. So if anyone has any questions, I would love to hear them and discuss them. Thanks, Bruce. Oh yeah, it's been fun to be here. And Muriel, I believe you're the one who introduced me to Second Life so long ago, right? Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I just haven't spent any time here at all until now, but I was grateful that you had introduced me because it made me more comfortable with it when Maggie showed me how to do it. I didn't feel completely out of my element, so thank you. Okay, Fred says, have you ever tried to sort out affecting the future as opposed to being affected by it? Yes, and then I gave up because once you start thinking causally, really thinking about what cause is. So first of all, cause is almost defined by order of events. So philosophically, it's very difficult to separate cause from order of events. So if you look up a dictionary or dictionary of philosophy or encyclopedia of philosophy definition of cause, it will also often say that one comes before the other. So if A comes before B, and A and B are correlated, and without A, B does not occur, then A can be said to cause B. Okay? So now let's just take out the part about if A comes before B. So now we're just going to say A and B are correlated, and without A, B does not occur. The problem with that is you still don't get a feel. There's this feeling of cause that we get from watching balls roll down inclined planes and hit other things, right? And so, which is a very linear time process. Fred, you're saying you could have the same picture go to two persons at once. I'm going to need more than that to understand what you're saying. Are you saying like, Fred, you're saying like you could have a single cause, like a projector, that's sending out multiple images, and then it feels like they're connected, but in fact it's a single projector that's doing them both. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Right, so people explain entanglement that way. To explain, so like Bell's paradox, for instance, right? So you could explain that way. And in fact, several people have. And in fact, that would be the sort of idea of the hidden variables. So when these things are going out into their separate locations that are space-like separated, you have hidden variables that are controlling how they show up in terms of polarization, say, for photons or something, right? And so that's one idea, but I don't think a lot of physicists like it. Another idea that I think might have more play is this Costa de Beauregard idea, where sort of if you have Alice and I'm assuming that you're familiar with Alice and Bob and all this, yeah. So if you have Alice and Bob, that Alice is essentially going backwards in time to influence Bob at the source, and that is considered retrocausality. But again, because of the definition of causality, it's hard to call it causality because it's in the opposite direction of what most people call causality. So you end up getting into this world where, to answer your question fully or somewhat fully, I think you end up getting into this world where what you have are correlations, and that's all you got. And some things are more tightly correlated, and some things are, necessary and sufficient for other things, but the causality is not known. So, okay, let me answer some of these other questions. What physical forces could carry information in a reverse direction? Yeah, I don't think there's physical forces. Are you being precise with your language? I don't know if you're a physicist or not, too. Yeah, are you being precise with your language? Are you actually asking for a force, or are you just saying physical things? Yes, right, Fred. That's exactly right. A and B seem. Tuya, can you tell me if you're precisely asking about force? Because I don't think there is a physical force that can do that. But I do think that, for instance, I don't know, have you read Transactional Interpretation of Quantum Mechanics? There's this idea of quantum land. So there's where particles don't really exist, but they're getting information about where their future existence is going to be. And so they can try out different paths in a way that ends up being a space in which, although it's not the physical reality, it's a sort of a mathematical reality in which they can suss out different futures for themselves. But see, we have to remember that our whole description of the physical universe, and so what the job of physicists has been to document, this is the difference between classical and quantum mechanics in a way, has been to document what our conscious awareness, what our conscious stories about what's happening tell us. So, okay, we drop a coffee cup and it breaks and it doesn't get back together in the opposite direction, right? So this, for instance, the second law of thermodynamics, right? So entropy in a closed system is either staying the same or increasing. So that's been what physicists have been doing, and then they start getting into quantum mechanics, where they're documenting conscious observations which are at the macroscopic level of things that you can't experience consciously. You can only experience side effects of them. And they end up finding out that there's other stories going on at that other level. And so there's this tricky philosophical thing that's going on with physics right now, I think, and at least the way I look at it, which is there's a lack of awareness among physicists because they don't take psychology courses, that their conscious awareness could potentially be an illusion or a story about what's happening. And so they're constantly trying to explain their observations that they get consciously, and not questioning them as much as maybe they should, and not recognizing that, for instance, the second law of thermodynamics is descriptive of what their conscious story is, but may not describe physical reality. So those things are also true, I think. And now Savage has a question. There are experiments that show that subatomic particles are affected by their own future as well as their past. Yeah, these delayed choice entanglement experiments. Yep. Yeah, again, that kind of quantum level, there may be things that are going on that are, there are things going on that are different from our experience at the classical level. And physicists call this the quantum level and classical level, and I call it the non-conscious and the conscious experience or story about what's happening. And Fred says, with the entanglement A, C drive, B, C drive, yes, there's none less correlation between A and B, that's right. Bruce says, multiverses, ... Bruce, if you want me to comment more on multiverses, tell me what you want me to comment on, or what your question is, or are you just saying multiverses exist? Well, tell me more, because I don't get what you're getting at. Tuyas says collapsing of probabilities. That argument ignores that complexity increases naturally. Which argument? I think what you're talking about, complexity increases naturally. Are you talking about the second law of thermodynamics? And are you conflating complexity with entropy? So I don't know. Maggie, smiley face. I'm behind you guys. Bruce, not really, just a notion. I think you're referring to my question about multiverses. Yeah, so there's this whole multiverse idea about how there's not one future, there's multiple futures, and there's these decision branching points which could happen. Of course, basically, the underlying thing is no one gets what's going on. No one gets what's going on with the universe and time when it comes down to it. So this is just, in a way, opening up. Well, you were talking about entropy. Okay, so that entropy increases. Yeah, right. This is another way of just opening up minds to that we are seeing effects at the biological level, at the psychological level, that seem to echo the idea that our conscious awareness at the classical level of what's going on isn't the full story. And Tahiti says, how could we research memories from what seem like a past existence, do you mean like a past life type of thing, versus experiencing the future as opposed to flat-out reincarnation, just bits of memories? Yeah, Tahiti, I have this sort of fantasy that's just totally appealing aesthetically and, of course, has no evidence, so frankly, it's not scientific. But it's this idea that when we die, sort of our consciousness goes into the soup and mixes around, and that the different pieces of the soup, I mean, the universe recycles the soup, and so different pieces of the soup show up in a new person. And so we may have these kind of memories from a past existence because a bit of the soup is in us. You know, you get like a chunk of lamb and a little chunk of carrot or whatever it is. And how could we research that? Well, I mean, you'd have to know every single thing that ever happened to a person in this existence, both consciously and non-consciously. And then if they have a memory of something that's not in that set of things, and it's a memory that's not a fantasy, I mean, it's pretty hard to research, is what I'm saying. I don't know. Maggie says that physicists don't have psychology and aren't just complexly thinking about their own consciousness, perceptions, etc. Yes, it's a real problem, and I'm really hoping to. Actually, I think it's a whole problem that our entire culture doesn't have psychology as a required course. Just the basics. I'm not talking about speculations, but just the basics of psychology being taught at elementary school and high school level would be just a huge cultural shift that would make a big difference. And people, I think, would understand a lot more about how their conscious awareness is being controlled by unconscious things. I'm glad you like that, Tahiti. I'm glad you like the analogy. The soup. Bruce says, Michael Newton's Journey of Souls deals with these questions, I'm sure. So many things do. Everything that I say, I'm sure other people have said, for sure. Physicists are exploring the possibility that our universe is a holograph projected from a singularity. Sure, that could be true too. What I find fascinating about physicists that are exploring any possibility, and in fact my own experiments and anyone else's experiments, is that we are, regardless, I agree, there seem to be cases where a large chunk of the soup comes back, so that could be, that maybe there's something that binds things together for some reason. But what I find fascinating about the fact that I'm willing to do experiments at all is that I'm fully a believer in Plato's cave, and in the sense that we can see the shadows on the wall, but we can't see what produces the shadows. And I'm starting to think there needs to be two sources of confirmation for, we try to look at the shadows and figure out what's producing the shadows, and I feel like there has to be two sources of confirmation. So one source is empiricism, which says we're going to do experiments with the shadows that's going to tell us about what's going on outside the cave. And another source is to do deep thinking or intuition about what's going on outside the cave. And I think both of those things are important. I think if you develop your intuition and then you check your intuitions with experiments about the shadows, you're going to be better off on understanding what's outside the cave than if you just do one or the other. I think people who are just intuitive but don't do experiments to check their intuitions, you could easily get misled. And I think people who just do experiments but don't have good intuition, you could just do a bunch of experiments that end up being useless. And so I think we ought to be training kids about how to use their intuition in the context of science and math. And I think that would actually really benefit the field. So anyway. The myth of the cave is totally Plato. It's not me. Would be great to know if there's a correlation between individuals' precognitive sensitivity and results of psychokinesis experiments with the same individual. Yeah, we're going to know that. You know, what's cool, we're putting out an app through the IONS Innovation Lab where people are it's going to be one app where we can do a personality profile and then check their precognition, both implicit and explicit, so conscious and non-conscious precognition, and their psychokinesis ability, and we'll be able to look at that correlation. So, I'm so excited to be able to say, yes, we can answer a question. but we don't have the answer yet because the app isn't out. It will be out in January. It's called PsyQ. I'm going to type that here, PsyQ, and look for it sometime January, February. Okay. I'm backing up here. I wonder, Bruce says, I wonder if there are any experiments with animals and precognition. Sheldrake, dogs know when their masters leave work, come home at random times. Yeah, so there are 2 experiments, published experiments, that are highly rigorous that I know about, both by the same person. Now his first name is Carlos, and it's not Alvarado, Carlos. Anyway, one of them I reviewed, I should remember, but anyway, one was with zebra finches. So they would have an image of, I believe, of a snake versus an image of something that's not so scary to the zebra finch. And before the snake, the zebra finches would act more agitated. So the person doing the experiment and recording the behavior didn't know what was about to be shown. And they would just record the behavior, and then they looked afterwards, okay, before the snake versus before the neutral thing, do I see any differences in behavior? And then that same person redid it with, redid that experiment with planaria worms. So the stimulus that was emotional was the loud vibration, which would cause them to scrunch up. And then he counted the scrunching times before the loud vibration versus before silence. So those are some experiments that are pretty cool. Tuya says, the double slit experiment shows that a photon acts both as a particle and wave. Yes. Well, yes, it does. And then there's other earlier experiments that show that too. Okay. Pitcher said, all good. I hear it from you. I'll add Plato to my notes. Good. And Plato is astounding. True that. They're not really memories, but more, oh, that is so familiar. I remember that scent, that feeling, that environment, this moment was there. So familiar is more accurate than memory. Right. So you know, we attach familiarity to things. This is part of how deja vu, or how we think deja vu works, right? You attach the sense of familiarity almost like a label. Like, I know that, I felt that, that's familiar. And that there's a whole group of researchers who are neuroscientists, psychologists who study familiarity being attached as a label to things. And so that's the kind of researcher, I don't research that, I think that's very interesting, but that's the kind of researcher who might be interested in what you're talking about. They'd have to have a very open mind. Most of them probably wouldn't. The Finch experiment is interesting, I agree. Yeah. Did you say that initial excitement state appears to be a factor in precognition? More excited, greater precog? No. So just to be clear, what I was saying is the results of this experiment. There were 100 people. We asked them about their current state of stress by looking at physical symptoms of stress and just generally asking them, you know, scale 1 to 10, how stressed do you feel right now? And then we had them much later, like an hour after that questionnaire, we had them do a precognition experiment, which was an implicit precognition experiment, the retrocausal one, meaning we didn't actually ask them to predict the future, but we looked at their response times. And the people who had the greatest difference in response time based on the future word, you know, in that priming experiment I showed you, those were the people who were least stressed. Now what I said, so in other words, there's this correlation between low stress, like if you're a smooth pond, when you drop a drop in the smooth pond, you're going to see the ripples in both directions better, right? If you're a choppy pond, you're not going to see the ripples. It's that kind of thing. Now, what I was saying about the excitement is that if the ripple is big, once it's dropped in the pond, you're going to see the ripple better. So if the pond itself is still, and let's say the rock you're dropping in is big, so it makes big ripples, it's going to be more obvious. So what does that mean? Let's take it from a metaphor to sort of everyday. If you're relaxed and the event is of great importance to you, then you should be able to precognize it better, at least non-consciously. And then Savage is saying the difference is whether the experiment is being observed or not. Yes, right, that's the double slit difference. Well, it's where it's always being observed, but it's where you do the observation of the photons. Do you do it after they go through the slits? So right after they go through the slits, if you try to figure out which slit the photon is going through, then it becomes a single, like a particle. It can only go through one slit. It only seems to go through one slit. If you're observing it at the back screen, like a photographic screen, after it goes through whichever slit it wants, and you don't know what slit it goes through, then it behaves like a wave, and you see an interference pattern. Okay, but in both cases, you're observing it. The question is where or when. Maggie Larimore says, hold on. Dick Bierman was talking about that, observation and its impact. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's fascinating, right? So at the quantum level, we have this experience, or we have mathematical proof at the quantum level that observation influences the collapse of the wave function, or it seems to be the case that it is doing that. In other words, observation helps create reality. At the classical level, most people don't have a conscious experience of that. Tahiti says there was an experiment where part of a plant was cut from the mama plant and was taken to a distance, and then cutting off the part of the mama plant, the baby plant will react simultaneously. Entanglement. Yeah, those kind of experiments, if they're replicated, I would say suggest entanglement. Also, there's some people doing experiments about taking, people to get amniocentesis when they're pregnant. Women get amniocentesis sometimes still, and taking some of those fetal cells and putting them somewhere else and seeing if the mom reacts. So that's kind of interesting. Dick was talking about observations' impact on our experimental results, the impact of the analyzers. Yes, that's right. So, yeah, I'm a fast reader. So, so there is an impact of the observation. In other words, so that double slit experiment. Here's the experiment you can't do, right? You want to do the experiment where you look both places at once. You put your sort of camera or detector, photon detector, by one of the slits, and you look at the back screen, and you don't observe either so that you can see what's really going on. But you can't do that because you end up, in order to find out what's really going on, you have to eventually look at the results. So, for instance, in a delayed choice entanglement experiment, the choice you make about where you're going to put your detector influences what happens. Simultaneous or at the speed of light. Oh shit, I don't know what that refers to. I'm sorry, I don't mean to swear. Oh crap, I don't know what that refers to. Simultaneous or at the speed of light. Bruce smiles. Entanglement is faster than light, right? Entanglement is the phenomenon. So the evidence of entanglement, I think, is what you're talking about, and the evidence of entanglement is simultaneous. So that is faster than light, that's simultaneous. Fred says not faster. No, it is. I mean, it's simultaneous. Simultaneous is infinitely faster than any speed. Fred says entanglement requires a closed light loop. No, because you have entanglement. You have evidence of entanglement. Well, to entangle something, yeah, but then those two things could get to space-light separation, right? So that's not the closed light loop. Okay. Savage says yes, it is. Were you referring to a closed, Savage, were you correcting me in saying that when two things are space-like separated, that's a closed-like loop? Could you tell me if that's what you were doing just now? Because I need to understand that. Stranger says, I believe there are experiments that suggest that these kind of things happen instantly, not on the dot. That's what I'm saying, is it does, in fact, it's pretty clear. You need to correlate the two. I was saying that entanglement is faster than light. Yes, I agree with you. And then Fred says, you need to correlate the two events. Information needs to come to a common point. Yeah. Yep. Right. But that's what Bell's inequality that is violated tells us, that it seems to be that there is okay, so you have the point at which this is sort of the source of, let's say, two photons, and then let's say they go to distances that are space-like separated. You measure the polarization of one photon, and from that you can predict statistically you can predict the polarization of the other photon. I mean, you can predict the polarization of the other photon based on what it statistically should be. So, but those things are space-like separated, so those aren't in communication. So, in fact, things happening many light years away have instantaneous effects. Yes, that's what I'm saying. Savage says, I was saying that entanglement is faster than light. Yes, if you could separate two entangled particles and send one light years away, you could send information instantaneously. Except you can't, right? So there's this whole this is getting well beyond this stuff, I guess, but there's this no communication theorem that shows that you can't. Okay, entanglement might be related to retrocausality. Yeah, it might. What Einstein tried to reject and called spooky accident distance. Yeah, so that's what Einstein tried to reject and ended up proving. Why do I dream of the future and remember the past in local consciousness? Yeah, well, I think that's because non-conscious processes are much more producing events that are much more accessible in dreams than they are in waking. So I think that in dreams we're actually much more likely to be getting information from the future that we can then remember than in waking consciousness. I don't know what the Ansible is, but I like that name. Sounds like a good name for a band. Julie needs to go in a couple minutes. Yeah, that's true. I do have to go in like 3 minutes. Thanks, Bruce. And something to check. Intriguing work on stress and emotion. Formation and strength of limbic circuits non-consciously and the role of cognitive observation and resolution. Continuing by Igor Mitrovich and Laurel Mellon at UCSF. Ooh, I used to be at UCSF. Haha, I'm going to look that up. Thank you, ma'am. So let's see, they have this paper called Rewiring the Health Response, a new paradigm, or the stress response, a new paradigm for healthcare. Is that what you're talking about? Yeah, I'd love to come back sometime. All right, thanks everyone. It's delightful. Everyone's so nice. Bye.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you so much.
Oh,
As
that
always,
was really fun.
This sim is going to come down next weekend, but Maggie has a setup here in Second Life. And you're always welcome back to come anytime. We'll always provide a venue for you whenever you want to come in and chat.
Well, thanks. That was delightful. And will people be able to access this in Second Life as a recording?
Maggie's got that.
Oh. Copies of links to my books. Do you want me to post a link to my book, Maggie? I mean, Nancy? Oh yeah, almost all my articles are free. Let me give you my academia. Find all my articles.
Awesome.
Here's a link to my academia page so you can see all the papers you want.
Thank you, Julia.
All right, everyone. Well, that was delightful. Thanks. What a fun experience. And I did it in my pajamas.
And we will see you dream hopefully soon.
All right. Take care. Go jammies. Bye.
Hi there, I'm Lisette Coley. I'm president of Parapsychology Foundation, so welcome to our YouTube channel. We have lots to look at, so please check out our videos. Don't forget to subscribe. Thank you.